Okay, so here are the verses. After this, and we see those words after this fairly frequently in John. It's just some indeterminate amount of time, sometime after the wedding of Cana. After this, Jesus, went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days. The Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went to Jerusalem. In the temple, he found those who were selling oxen and sheep and pigeons and the money changers sitting there. And making a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And he told those who sold the pigeons, "Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." So the Jews said to him, "What sign do you show us for doing these things?" He answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But Jesus was speaking about the temple of his body. When therefore he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, that he would rise from the dead. And they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. Now, when Jesus was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he was doing. But Jesus, on his part, did not entrust himself to them because he knew all people and needed no one to bear witness about man, for he himself knew what was in a man. So sometime after the wedding at Cana, Jesus goes to Jerusalem. And we learn a little bit more than that when we read John 2:12, where it says, "After this he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days." So he had not just his disciples, but he had some family members there as well, which is pretty interesting. And it says that he went down to Capernaum. Now we've talked about this before, but we've talked about it the other way. Like it always in the Bible, when it refers to going to Jerusalem, you always say he went up, or I went up, or they went up to Jerusalem, no matter where you're coming from. You're coming from the north, you're coming from the south, doesn't matter. You're going up to Jerusalem. Now, what did I tell you? Why is that? Why do they always say you go up to Jerusalem? Yeah.
Elevated?
That's part of it. It's elevated. But it's, yeah, so those both are true. It is a higher elevation than most of the rest of Israel. But secondly, it is the holy city. It is God's city. And so you go up to Jerusalem as a way of elevating spiritually Jerusalem. Okay? So now they're going down to Capernaum. Basically the same idea, just opposite, right? They're going down to Capernaum. They're going north to go down to Capernaum. But they're coming down from the holy city. And usually for us, we say, I went up to Minnesota, right? Or I went down to Texas, or something like that. We usually think of it that way, north-south. Although my daughter has never been able to. Did I hit play? Yep. Okay, good. So Capernaum is a name that means the village of Nahum. And he was a prophet. You probably know that from memorizing the books of the Old Testament. And it became Jesus' earthly headquarters during his time of ministry. When it said he went home or he returned, he was returning to Capernaum, which is really interesting. It was the home of Peter. It wasn't where Jesus was from. It was where Peter was from. And we're not told how long, or where Peter was living at that time, I should say. We're not told how long they stayed there. And where they went after that, and Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't tell us that either. But I want to take you on a little tour of modern day Capernaum, or the ruins of old Capernaum. I think I've told you before that my dream is to go to Israel, and every time I see these pictures, I want to go even more. So here they were at Cana. Right? And the wedding at Cana, and they went up to Jerusalem, which is south. And so then they went back to Capernaum. What is Capernaum? There it is. It's in there. So it's right near the Sea of Galilee, and it's kind of this triangle here with Chorazin and Bethsaida, which you remember from the video we watched. And it is just a small fishing village. And so this is the remains of the synagogue at Capernaum. That picture, I'll show you that again. So here's the synagogue ruins. This was likely not the synagogue that Jesus would have gone to. This rock would have been imported. This white rock would have been imported. But the synagogue that Jesus would have gone to there was built, this was built on the remains of that. So here's an overview of a portion of Capernaum. And you can see the synagogue here, which was, of course, the center of the Jewish life. And you can see some homes that would have been around that, or the remains of some homes that would have been around that synagogue. And then this is possibly the remains of Peter's house. Now, I don't know that it is for sure. I guess I've got this going the wrong way, don't I? Move it over here.
That's a big hexagon.
Yeah. So why do we think that? Why do we think that? On the walls, there is ancient, I don't have a better word, graffiti etched into the walls, venerating Christ. That this was a place where Christ was worshipped. This home was a place where Christ was worshipped. And Jesus would return to Peter's house in Capernaum. That was like his, when he was had downtime, that's where he went. And so because of the ancientness, that's probably not even a word, of the etchings, it's believed that this is possibly at least Peter's house. Want to go with me now? Would that be so cool? Stand where Jesus stood, and certainly where the synagogue is. He stood there. Just a layer of rock below it. How cool would that be? I thought I had pictures of that too. There's this black basalt, that rock that's below the synagogue, and that would have been original, and that would have been rock from that area that would have been brought into the altar. Okay, so the Passover of the Jews was at hand. This means it's near. It's almost Passover, right? We might say Thanksgiving, and now that Halloween's over, thank goodness, that Passover is at hand, right? I didn't even have to go through it because we didn't get home until, I don't know, 10:30. How late was it, Charlie? It was late. We didn't get home until late, and it was all over the shop by then. But my daughter took care of it, so that's good. So the Passover of the Jews was at hand. It's soon, right? It's coming up. And Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And we talked about that, about how you always say up to it. So let's talk about the Passover then. So John's Gospel, as I've told you before, is centered around these Passovers. Passover was the highest, the most holy of their feasts, as they were called. And feast doesn't just mean like a big banquet. It means a religious celebration. So it took place around that time. Now, the Synoptic Gospels also have Jesus cleansing the temple. But that's placed very near the time of his death. This one is placed very early in his ministry. That one's placed late in his ministry. This one's placed early in his ministry. So what do we make of that? There's several choices, and all of them Not all of them are. Two of them are possible. One is that there were two cleansings, that Jesus did this twice. And that's entirely possible. Another is that someone got it wrong. I don't think that's probably possible, especially if we really talk about the inerrancy of God's word. But another possibility, and you're gonna, when I say this, you're gonna go, just hang with me, okay? Before you just tune me out because you're like, she's a heretic. It is possible that for thematic reasons, John moved the cleansing to early in his gospel. That other cleansing also took place at Passover. It was the Passover just before he was crucified. And why does that not make me go? Because in ancient times, that wouldn't have been considered being inaccurate or deceiving. Or ancient authors of history did that. Like, this fits my theme here, so I'm going to put it here. Personally, I think there were two cleansings, but it is possible that John chose to move it to early. We think like Greeks. We think linearly. We think like timeline, right? And Eastern cultures are much more global. And how this connects to this, and this connects to this, and this connects to this, and we go with this, and there was this, and then there was this. And so it's not a problem for Eastern people to think that John, but it makes us a little squeamish. But I think there's probably two cleansings. We can't know for sure. As C.S. Lewis said, the first thing we're going to say when we get to heaven is, of course, because we'll know even as we're fully known. So we'll know which it is. We'll have a nice little chat about, well, look, you were wrong and I was right, or something. So in your curriculum, your book says it's now the Passover of AD 29. I don't know. All I know for sure is it's Passover. It's time for the Passover. And so I'm going to take that away. Tell me about Passover. Tell me what you know about Passover. Yeah.
Commemorates the Exodus.
Commemorates the Exodus. What's the Exodus? Leaving Egypt, and what was going on in Egypt? Okay, there are 10 plagues, but they were slaves. Okay, so let's go way back. Let's go way back to ancient history, right? So Joseph gets kidnapped or beaten up by his brothers. They sell him into slavery, and he becomes a slave in Egypt. And there's a long story in there somewhere. You can watch the movie Joseph and the Temple. Amazing Technicolor. We all know the whole story. Pretty close. And so he ends up being, through God-ordained events, being number 2 to Pharaoh. So his brothers come to get grain from him, and then the whole family comes, and then they stay, and the Jews grow, and they grow, and they grow, and many, many, many years later, when there was a Pharaoh who did not remember Joseph, then the Pharaoh got afraid. Please don't do that. Because and so Pharaoh was afraid of them. Like, these people are too large. They're too powerful. We need to enslave them so that they don't turn us all into Jews and overthrow us. And so the Jews became captive for hundreds of years in Egypt. And when the time came, God called Moses. He was rather unwilling to do what God was asking him to do. He saw this bush that was on fire but not burning up. And if you saw a bush that was on fire but not burning up, you might go, what? And, or as my niece used to say when she was little, what the heck? And you'd go over there, right? And so he does. And then, I mean, if he was freaked out already, right? I mean, that was just interesting. But the burning bush talked to him. Now you'd be, I'd probably be running away like, it's a talking bush! And the talking bush, which is God, tells him, Moses, go free my people. And Moses says, yeah, no. And Moses begins to argue with God, but eventually, of course, he does go. And eventually, of course, after 10 plagues, he does set his people free. And they go into the desert after Pharaoh was once again thwarted from killing them. And they spent 40 years there. Why did they spend 40 years there? Yeah. Yep, and they were rebelling against God. In fact, Moses was only gone for a short while getting the 10 Commandments when they decided, you know what? There must not be a God. Okay, 10 plagues, miraculously released from slavery. They saw a huge sea, right? Part in two, so they could walk through on dry ground, and then it just folded over onto Pharaoh's people, Pharaoh's soldiers. And Moses is gone for a little bit, and they're like, pretty sure that's not God. Why don't we make our own God? And they continued to act that way throughout. And so they had to wander for 40 days. So that's the background. That's what Passover is commemorating. And in Leviticus, I think God instituted. God said to Moses, you will celebrate what I have done every year for the rest of perpetuity, for all of time. And guess what? This March, April, Jews all over the world will be celebrating. When out with the 10th plague, which was the plague of the death of the firstborn of every family, God passed over the Jews. The angel of death passed over and did not kill the Jews. What was the sign that was a Jewish household? Yeah. The lamb's blood on the top and the sides. Foreshadowing anywhere? Right? Saved by the blood of the Lamb. Yeah.
Well, in the next 10 years or so, the anniversary of Jesus' death and our crucifixion.
Every year is the anniversary.
2000.
I don't think we can know what exact year. It was around 80. But we don't know for sure that it was.
Like 50
But
years.
it's getting there. Yeah, sometime around there. So, again, we see this foreshadowing of Christ. So how do they celebrate that? And I have no idea what all's on it. It's to remind the Israelites of their Egyptian captivity and their release. And God instituted what they were to do. They were to have a feast. They were to have this meal, every part of which is symbolic. The Passover meal is not to be like you just went to a China buffet and you're walking out like, man, I ate too much. It's symbolic. And every part of it is symbolic for the mortar that they put between the bricks, for the what do I want to say, the horror of their slavery and everything else, the bitterness of their slavery. Every part of the meal represents something, and it's a worship time. It's a family worship time where the father says things and the people respond, and they retell the story, and they retell the story, and they retell the story. And so that is called the Seder Feast. That meal is called the Seder Feast. That's how you spell Seder. And they commemorate it every single year, and they will until Jesus comes back. They don't realize that, but they will. So the Lord passed over those houses, and it's to be an annual event, and it is. But John refers to it as the Jews' Passover. By the way, so I told you it was an annual event, and it was celebrated every year in the month of Nisan, which roughly, their calendar is different than our calendar. They're not a 12-month calendar, is roughly late March, early April. And we celebrate Easter then as well, and very close to the Passover time. Why? Because Jesus died during Passover. Right? So those are close together. So God commanded that this would happen on the 14th day of the first month of the Jewish calendar, which is the month of Nisan. The evening after the Passover is called, it's the first night of a feast called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And the Feast of Unleavened Bread commemorates that they had to leave Egypt so quickly that they didn't have time for their bread to rise, so they only had unleavened bread, bread that hadn't risen. And so that's why it's called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But nowadays, most people look at those 8 days, like you've got the day of Passover, and then you've got immediately after that the 7-day Feast of Unleavened Bread, as the Passover. Some Jews call it, all of it, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, but technically they're two separate but related things. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. They both have to do with the Exodus. The Passover specifically has to do with the firstborn not being killed, and then the Feast of Unleavened Bread is celebrating the actual Exodus, the actual leaving of Egypt. So most Jews today refer to the entire time period as Passover, and they don't eat anything with leaven during that 8 days as part of that celebration. So then we get to the Jews' Passover, and the thing is that when God instituted it in Exodus 12, He said it is to be the Lord's Passover. I'm the one that passed over. I'm the one that saved you. It is the Lord's Passover. So your book says that this is whether they meant it or not. It was an indication of kind of a dumbing down of the Passover. Like it was God's thing, and now all of a sudden it's the Jews' thing. Kind of like the commercialization of Christmas. Is it really about Jesus? Or is it about Santa Claus? Right? And so the point that John may be making by saying it's the Jews' Passover is that the Passover had denigrated over time as well. I don't know for sure. I don't think we can know that for sure. And it had been the Lord's Passover for centuries, and now all of a sudden it's the Jews' Passover. It's possible. But we can also see the further degeneration of the Passover just in this whole story, right? Where people were going to Jerusalem, and they had to have something to sacrifice, an animal to sacrifice. They had to bring their wife and their children, and probably a cow or a goat to get milk from, and they had to bring provisions for that, and it was a lot to do because it wasn't like they were walking from here to the cafeteria, right? It wasn't even like they were walking from here to my house, which is about a 7-minute drive away. They were walking a very long distance. Like if you were taking your whole family on a trip by foot from here to Lincoln. And it was much rougher terrain, right? And there's no sidewalks and things like that. So it would have been difficult, and it would have needed by necessity needed planning. We every year have Thanksgiving. Actually, we didn't last year because of COVID. But at my sister's house in Kansas City. My part in that is to several things. I make all the pies for 20-some people. I make pumpkin fluff because I have a nephew that if I don't make pumpkin fluff, he's 18 years old, but he might cry. And I have to get the stuff to make. I have to make pumpkin fluff. I have to get all the crackers, the cookies, and everything else you dip into it. And then I make for the whole family, 20-some people, from scratch pumpkin pancakes on Thanksgiving morning. So I have to bring everything I need for that. And by the time we're done, I used to also make the turkey. Now, praise God, my brother-in-law smokes the turkeys, so I don't have to do that. So I don't have to take the roaster anymore. But I have to get all of that purchased. Whoa! I have to get all of that purchased, put into my car, everything I need for it to go, and it is a lot of work. This year, they told me, you know what? Let's just buy pies. I went, yes, let's just buy pies. But it was, if somebody could have told me, you know what? I'll just go to Kansas City. I'll buy all that. I'll have it all ready. All you gotta do is cook. I'd be like, and every year they're like, buy pies. Let's buy pies. I'm like, buy pies. It's Thanksgiving, for heaven's sakes. We need from scratch pies, right? And it was even more than that. They were bringing their families. They were bringing their animals to sacrifice. They were bringing other animals to help them subsist during that time. So that's how the practice came to be. They were bringing money that they were going to have to change. How much easier would it be to exchange that money in the temple and then just go give the money, right? How much easier would it be to buy that lamb or that dove once you're there, right? And that's how the practice started. We'll pick up there tomorrow.